Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Lor-Online. In today's video, I will be discussing my personal top 10 favourite nightmare fights in the Star Wars: The Old Republic MMO. Now, very quickly, as a disclaimer, I plan to incorporate other non-master mode fights into this list, more specifically bosses that I consider to be NIM level in difficulty. This includes bosses from hardware operations, such as Ravengers, Gods from the Machine, and Temple of Sacrifice. With that being said, SWTOR contains some of the hardest boss fights in the MMO industry, requiring players to have a keen eye for set mechanics and an in-depth understanding of not only their class, but specific situational checks, whether DPS, healing or otherwise. Now, unlike other MMOs, Star Wars: The Old Republic has strict enforcement policies against add-ons, and thus, unlike other MMOs, players cannot really heavily rely on artificial support, which encourages SWTOR raiders to systematically learn each and every fight as in-depthly as possible. So, as always, sit back and relax as we discuss Star Wars: The Old Republic's top 10 NIM bosses.
Number 10.
Starting off our list today at number 10, we have Hard Mode Isaacs as part of the Gods from the Machine operation. Isaac is the newest boss in SWTOR, featuring some really interesting mechanics that pushes the limitations of the hero engine. Unlike other bosses featured later on in this list, Isaacs is an endurance-heavy fight that utilizes an abundance of ad-based mechanics in an attempt to overwhelm new players. Now, Isaac really stands out to me as a boss, mainly due to his new tether system, a newly implemented boss mechanic that allows players to literally pick up and throw ads. More specifically, in Phase 5, tanks are advised to use this tether mechanic to throw mine droids off the platform in an attempt to save the payload ad, in this case being Skyver. Now, if tanks fail to slingshot the ads, or worse, slingshot the ads into players, the fight can be very messy. In addition to the current hard mode Isaacs, there's actually a new NIM Gods from the Machine operation coming out very soon, and I definitely suggest that returning NIM raiders give that raid variant a go.
Number 9.
Next up at number 9, we have Master Mode FIREBRAND and STORMCALLER, one of my all-time favourite bosses to tank. Now, the predominant reason that FNS made this list is ultimately because of the fight's overall skill ceiling, as players can clear this fight with little hassle on optimally. However, unlike other fights in Star Wars: The Old Republic, FIREBRAND and STORMCALLER can be cleared in half the time through mechanical coherence, as long as the DPS spread is optimal and tanks know how to position themselves correctly to reflect spires. To elaborate, spires from STORMCALLER can be reflected by Jug tanks and of course other classes with an FT reflex such as Mercs and Jug DPS. With this being said, the damage output of a Jug tank can easily exceed 10k DPS if done properly, and thus equal the damage output of a DPS spec in pass. In addition to the reflect, players can take advantage of raid challenges and use AoE's undershield if done carefully and concisely. To summarize what I'm saying here, the reason this fight is so fun is because you can really push the raid challenge to its limit and play around with various mechanics to overall improve your performance and improve your kill time. It is definitely a fight I'd recommend trying if you're new to the game and want to get a little bit of experience as a tank.
Number 8.
Up next at number 8, we have REVAN Hard Mode, a fight notorious for its dreaded third floor. REVAN has made this list for a variety of reasons, one in particular being the fight's ability to check all raid members simultaneously, another being REVAN's constant demand for precise positioning and key awareness. Arguably, REVAN's first floor is rather simplistic in design, but constantly asks the most out of its challenges. Tanks have to position themselves in line with pillars for knockbacks, healers have to juggle cleanses across the raid group whilst keeping a close eye on themselves, and DPS have to worry about spinning sabers potentially interfering with rotations if not dealt with appropriately. But what makes REVAN so appealing to me is its third floor, a clock-like phase that asks for constant communication and deep concentration. Players have to meticulously position themselves safely for pushes and pulls, whilst constantly watching out for aberrations that, if not directly looked at, will throw you swiftly off the edge of the arena. Because of this, many prog teams struggle to clear REVAN due to the demand on both the raid leader, or caller, as well as its participants.
Number 7.
At number 7 today, we have Master Mode Explosive Conflict's very own KEPHESS, a boss that requires a lot of communication from both tanks and their respective healers. Now, KEPHESS, unlike most bosses, favours white damage, and due to the current meta of Star Wars: The Old Republic, most tanks are encouraged to build shield and absorb over defense rating due to various inconsistencies and the rareness of DR as a primary source of a boss's damage. Basically, most tanks won't fare well against white damage. As a result, tanks generally take a beating when handling and maneuvering KEPHESS, and thus the healers have to work a little bit harder just to make sure the tanks are healed up. In addition to this, tanks therefore have to use DCDs very sparingly and really can't afford to waste any, and as you can imagine, KEPHESS does become quite a tough prog because of this. Now despite this however, I feel KEPHESS has definitely earned a place on this list because it really teaches tanks the ropes of NIM level Apex tanking, especially when it comes to tank swaps and of course DCD management as we've discussed.
Number 6.
Next up at number 6 on our list today is Master Mode Gate Commander Draxus from Dread Fortress. Draxus is conventionally disliked due to the fight's pressing emphasis on DPS over other roles. The tank, or tanks for example, have little to do mechanically throughout this fight with exception to an aggro dump and possibly the occasional interrupt. DPS on the other hand, have to juggle positioning, interrupts, priority targeting, and even threat generation on dismantlers throughout the course of the fight. As a result, I have known prog teams to struggle on Draxus for months on end, but what makes Draxus stand out for me personally, and why I seem to be worthy of number 6 on our list today, is due to the fight's methodical approach to adds. To explain, Draxus is one of the only fights in the game where everyone in the group is doing their own thing independently, and the group has to completely trust in one another to hit their interrupts and burn down prioritized adds. As a result, Draxus for me has always emitted a sense of accomplishment when defeated. It's almost like the whole team has done their part and proven that they can function individually as well as a unit. In a sense, Draxus is one of the only fights in the game where everyone is doing their own thing independently, and the group has to completely trust in one another to hit their interrupts and burn down prioritized adds. As a result, Draxus for me anyway has always emitted a sense of accomplishment when defeated. It's almost like the whole team has done their part and proven that they can function individually and also as a unit.
Number 5.
Coming up halfway at number 5 we have the CARTEL Warlords from Scum and Villainy Master Mode. Arguably, the Warlords are one of the most detailed fights in the game, having 24 different adaptations depending on your kill order. Most groups however either leave Sunder or Vile up last to avoid Horik's clock phase, which is very tough to deal with in Nightmare, especially if Vile is up with his hard stun. Anyway, the CARTEL Warlords have made this list primarily because of the many different variations the fight encompasses, and how groups have theory crafted, to this day, different and interesting ways of dealing with the different combinations of mechanics presented throughout the fight. In addition, the Warlords are one of the very few fights in the game that encourages the group to stay organised throughout. One great example of this is the cleanses on 2Chuck's tank, as healers will often need to ask the tank to self-cleanse in order to support other members of the raid. This organisation is again apparent with whoever is tanking Sunder, as they will need to make enough room to successfully kite him without losing aggro on the fixate channel.
Number 4.
Taking number 4 on this list is TFB himself from Terraform Beyond Master Mode. Unlike other fights on this list, TFB is one of the easier Apex Master Mode bosses. The fight has essentially the same mechanics as hard mode, with a few tight checks, and of course some damage scaling here and there. However, TFB, unlike other Apex bosses, can be done casually and everyone can have fun while doing it, as long as members of the raid pay attention to mechanics and make sure the overall raid DPS is consistent. So, the reason TFB makes this list is because it's a great fight to prog as a DPS. There's a bunch of mechanics that enforce discipline into your set DPS rotation, and furthermore it discourages damage fluffing by punishing players in the wrong places. For example, if you push a tentacle too early in phase 1, the other tentacle produces enraged slams that the other tank has to deal with. This will likely result in an angry tank, or worse, a group wipe. Another great example of DPS punishment is within second phase. Now if the DPS try to fluff off TFB himself, they risk pushing TFB too early, causing a furious tantrum, which will again wipe the raid. And finally, if DPS don't save their burst for anomalies, they risk group-wide damage, which could in turn wipe the raid. So in essence, if the DPS have no self-control, it's likely that the boss may become somewhat troublesome to prog. However, if everything goes smoothly, then this fight can be one of the most entertaining and enjoyable in the game.
Number 3.
At third place on our list today, we have Nightmare Council from Dread Palace Master Mode. Now, for the first phase, Council, in my opinion, is much harder for tanks than it is any other role, as the tank on Bestia has to micromanage stacks whilst kiting Bestia away from other bosses, which can be a huge distraction due to the inconsistencies of the fight depending on the group you're with, as of course, many groups will maneuver the bosses differently, meaning the tank on Bestia has to adapt to best fit each group, and it starts getting out of control. In addition to this, healers often struggle with heal checks due to the positioning of everyone in the group, especially during cleanses, resulting in healers often having to call tanks and DPS to self-cleanse in order to prevent a group-wide wipe. Furthermore, second phase brings to the table a few new mechanics that can really mess with progression groups. To specify, groups tend to have difficulty with reaches if they're not accustomed to that style of mechanic, and because of this, I feel Council Master Mode is a very enjoyable prog, yes, but it really challenges everyone in the group to stay focused and keep aware of their positioning as not to sabotage other members of the raid.
Number 2.
Second place on our list today is also from Dread Palace Master Mode, and that's Dreadmaster Tyrans. Tyrans has been one of my favourite fights to prog in Star Wars: The Old Republic, offering a very fast-paced, methodical encounter with very punishing mechanics if done incorrectly. To start off, threat generation for Tyrans is very peculiar and sporadic, which makes keeping aggro very difficult for tanks. For example, if tanks mess up their triple taunt rotation or taunt too early after simplification, it can be very easy for other members of the raid to pull off, which usually results in a group wipe. Furthermore, simplification in itself is very hard to micromanage. Without a good raid lead or good platform system, it is very common for players to delete platforms that are necessary for a clean kill, and thus change the pacing of the encounter, often resulting in a wipe. Tyrans is also very random with his use of cleaves, so tanks again have to be very sparing with DCDs in case of a heavy hitting thundering blast or even shock. And finally, Tyrans also has a nasty debuff called Inferno that when expired drops a ticking AoE. Again, this AoE will wipe a group if positioned poorly. All in all, Tyrans is a fight that takes time to learn and can be very enjoyable, especially during prog, due to the systematic nature of the encounter, and I would definitely recommend this fight to anyone new or returning due to the immense fun I've had progging it with my raid teams.
Number 1.
Finally, at first place on our list today, my favourite nightmare level fight in Star Wars: The Old Republic is Brontes from Master Mode Dread Fortress. Brontes, to put it simply, is incredibly well designed, especially during burn phase, where each member of the group is independently tested to assure that they have a fully comprehensive understanding of their class. Every raider has to use DCDs optimally, regardless of role, DPS needs to be consistent, even as tank, and healing has to be optimal. This fight, unlike others, will kill raiders who mess up something as simple as a GCD. For example, if a tank wastes a DCD before final burn, well, you might as well stuck it. Now, this difficulty is not the reason that this fight is number 1 on our list, however. It is actually because of the unique mechanics featured throughout the fight. Specifically during burn phase, raiders have to handle a specific add unit, commonly referred to as orbs, whereas all members of the raid have to eat orbs using DCDs and various cheeses before said orbs reach 20 stacks. To clarify, if an orb reaches 20 stacks, the group will take a massive jolt of damage, which 9 out of 10 times will wipe the raid. Now, if that isn't hard enough, raiders while juggling orbs also have to handle a cleanse mechanic which is featured throughout burn phase. Brontes essentially applies a stacking debuff called Supremacy, which increases damage taken per tick by 10%. This can only be cleansed twice, through the use of a placed shield, meaning healers and DPS need to constantly communicate in order to optimize shield pushes. Then finally, it's a race to down Brontes. Tanks essentially sacrifice themselves during this phase if DPS is low, meaning damage dealers in the raid really need to optimize their rotations in order to beat the orbs and kill Brontes before he kills everyone else. Ultimately, Brontes is hell to prog, but unlike other fights, Brontes is just so hectic and fun, it had to make this list. And there we have it. Thank you again for watching another Star Wars: The Old Republic Top 10. I hope you all enjoyed the video as much as I did making it. This one was very difficult to get right. Of course, there's a lot of fights in the game, and there's a lot of information to digest, and to be honest, I only had 6 months at best to record this, so I'm very grateful to all the raiders who prog this content with me, and made this video possible. I'd also like to thank my raid teams for the weekly progression, and I hope everyone's enjoying the new raid, which should be out by the time this video is uploaded, unless of course another BioWare delay, which happens sometimes, it's inevitable. Anyway, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye guys.